My name is Nassim. I am one of the writers at the Middle East Monitor. And first of all, thank everyone for coming to this event on academic censorship in the UK. It's a real privilege to see you all. And of course, I want to thank our three panelists. Antony, who will be chairing the event today, Antony Lerman, David Miller, and Brendan Browne. So these are our three panelists for today. Antony, before I hand over to Antony to set the scene, set the stage for today's conversation, as much as this needs setting a stage because it's such an important topic, especially in light of what's been happening over the, not just since 7 October, since many, many years, I would say, a number of decades, this issue has become a key front line in defending the rights of the Palestinian issue. And I think we're all familiar with the term, the limit of free speech is Palestine, but I don't think we've ever realized what that limit really is, the limit of our government's willingness to crack down on the limits of free speech on Palestine. We never knew what that limit was until 7 October. And we've seen that they are willing to defend genocide in the service of genocide and undermine their own position in the world in servicing the genocide. So we are actually at a perilous time where our governments are undermining the very principles and the foundations of what we believe to be true and the very principles of Western civilization, I would say. So it is a perilous time, and at the front line of that is the censorship on academia, censorship on media, and we're happy to be hosting an event in exposing the censorship in media. With that, I want to hand over to Antony. He will speak for 10 minutes and introduce our guests. And then both our speakers will speak for 10 to 15 minutes each, and hopefully have half an hour or more for question and answers. The important thing is we need to be out. Well, the only thing to note is that we need to be out by 8:30, so we have a long time, 1.5 hours, to listen to our speakers and also give you the opportunity to say and contribute and ask questions to our speakers as well. So with that, I'll hand over to Antony Lerman.
Thank you very much, Nassim. Antony, who is really known as Tony, so if anybody needs to address me by my name, please use Tony rather than Antony. Anyway, thanks for that introduction, Nassim. And thank you on our behalf for organizing this very important and really nicely populated event. So let me get straight away stuck in to introduce David and Brendan. I'll start with Brendan. So Dr. Brendan Browne is Assistant Professor of Conflict Resolution and a Fellow at Trinity College Dublin. His previous academic positions include at Queen's University Belfast and as Assistant Professor of Transitional Justice and International Law at the Al-Quds University, Occupied Palestine. His research focuses on issues related to transitional justice, liberal peacebuilding, and forced displacement in the context of Palestine and the north of Ireland. And he has published extensively in a range of academic journals, in print and online media, and has a number of books, including Experiences in Researching Conflict and Violence, Fieldwork Interrupted, and Transitional Injustice, and Enforcing the Peace on Palestine, which was nominated for the 2023 Middle East Monitor Palestine Book Award. Brendan was a target of academic censorship over his work in Palestine. Invited last November to speak about his latest book at an international symposium in May at the University of Vienna, in March, his invitation was revoked. The organization cited anti-Semitic hate crimes and statements by Brendan on social media. David Miller is a sociologist. He held professional posts in sociology at Strathclyde University and Bath University between 2004 and 2018, when he was appointed Professor of Sociology at Bristol University. He's an expert on Islamophobia and also specializes in the analysis of state and corporate lobbying. He's the founder and co-director of the non-profit company Public Interest Investigations. He set up a lobbying watchdog, Spinwatch, tracking corporate and state lobbies, furthering the interests of, for example, the pharmaceutical industry, Israel, and the UAE. His publications include What is Islamophobia? Racism, Social Movements, and the State, and this is a great title, Thinker, Faker, Spinner, is that right? Spy, Corporate PR, and the Assault on Democracy. And accused of anti-Semitism and spreading conspiracy theories, a Bristol University investigation found that his comments were not unlawful, but despite this, his employment by the university was terminated in October 2021 because it was deemed he had not met the standards of behavior expected of staff. On 5 February 2024, an employment tribunal found that David was unfairly dismissed and subjected to discrimination because his, quote, anti-Zionist beliefs qualified as a philosophical belief and as a protected characteristic pursuant to Section 10, Equality Act 2010. And I think many people hope that that is a landmark decision which may well affect other cases which may well be coming up in coming months and years. Okay, so before Brendan and David expand on their experiences in their own presentations, I'm just going to give a bit of background, context, and beginning by saying we must be clear that what is providing the fuel in which powers these cases and so many other examples of censorship in academia is weaponized anti-Semitism, as we will hear in more detail. Well, we're well used to this in this country by now, I'm sure you know, since it fueled the anti-Corbyn campaign. Those who deploy it honed their skills against Jeremy Corbyn. Those who observed or experienced it then have no difficulty identifying it when they see it deployed. And as I wrote recently in an article for the declassified website, weaponized anti-Semitism is the gift that keeps on giving. But we must be clear about two other things. First, that what is being weaponized is not real anti-Semitism, but anti-Zionism. Anti-Semitism has been redefined as anti-Zionism, and the widespread dissemination of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition of anti-Semitism is one of the principal ways in which institutions, universities in particular, either willingly or unwillingly, are complicit in this chilling of free speech, either against individual academics or the institutions themselves, or student bodies like the NUS, which faced a grossly one-sided inquiry indicting pro-Palestinian and Muslim students. And second, that granting free speech cannot then be circumscribed by introducing a list of exceptions. There is no right not to be offended, and if academic settings are not the places where these differences can be aired, what are they for? Where else should you be able to take it for granted that free speech on Palestine and Israel is permissible? In January, the writer David Renton wrote in Jacobin magazine in an article, British Universities Are Repressing Free Speech on Palestine, Palestine, he wrote, "In the last 3 months, several hundred people in Britain have been investigated or threatened with dismissal at work for expressing pro-Palestinian views. This is the biggest attack on free speech for decades, and universities are its main background." End quote. He continues, according to Miriam Aurag, vice chair of the Black Members Standing Committee of the University and College Union, UCU, quote, "Overwhelmingly, the people who are being singled out are our racialized colleagues. Some are Muslim, some are Arab, some are black, with an anti-colonial stance." A study of allegations of anti-Semitism made against university staff. Thanks. Between January 2017 and May 2022 found that in 38 of the 40 cases, the allegations of anti-Semitism were dismissed. The other 2 remained under investigation when the report was concluded. In many of those cases, the staff subject to complaint were indeed black or Arab or Muslim. The culture of higher education is changing, Aurag warns, under the impact of the purge. Quote, "This is an ugly competitive sector. The people who work on Palestine, who have been speaking out, we know there is a magnifying glass on us. We know we will not be selected for grants. We know we will not be selected for permanent roles. No one is speaking up for the people whose free speech is being challenged, certainly not the Labour MPs, who have been instructed not to march for peace and to join demonstrations only if they are in solidarity with Israel's war. Even Britain's liberal free speech charities are looking away. Ruth Smith, the Labour peer, who is head, I think still, for the moment at least, head of Index on Censorship, travelled in December on a solidarity mission to Israel, where she expressed her support for the politicians detonating universities in Gaza. Since October 2023, Arif Ahmed, who has been Director for Freedom of Speech and Academic Freedom, of the Office for Students, or in popular parlance, the government-appointed Free Speech Tsar. The sole purpose of Ahmed's job is to protect freedom of speech, of expression in universities. He appears to have given no public speech since 9th of October, nor issued any press release or other statement reminding universities of their need to protect lecturers discussing the ethics of the war. For many years, the conservative press has warned that universities were doing too little to protect free speech. The papers printed lurid fantasies warning that higher education was dominated by a cadre of left-wing lecturers who were trying to cancel their critics. The government introduced special legislation to mandate universities to prioritize freedom of expression. Critics warned that while legislation seemed to protect free speech at universities, in reality, it would be used to spread conservative opinions. I should have a table, really. And discipline left-wingers. Those dynamics have happened just as we feared, with the conservative press having gone from demanding unlimited free speech in 21-22, now arguing that speech cannot be free and that pro-Palestinian people should be prosecuted or driven from their posts. The continued success of weaponization relies on a distorted and instrumentalized view of Jewish history, the notion that, on the one hand, anti-Semitism is eternal and unchanging, and yet on the other, anti-Zionism is the new anti-Semitism. Either way, the politicized anti-Semitism organizations constantly encourage people to believe that anti-Semitic annihilation is just around the corner. This moral panic only emphasizes how the weaponization is diametrically opposed to the real needs of Jewish people, but serves the interests of the Israeli state, which, contrary to all the evidence, presents itself as the safest place in the world for Jews, and therefore binds many Jews ever more closely to the state, though this may be changing. As for anti-Zionism, nothing could be more Jewish. Jews were the first anti-Zionists, overwhelmingly remained so until the Second World War, and hundreds of thousands remain anti-Zionist to this day. Okay, that's enough from me. I'm now going to hand over to David, who will speak first.
Thank you, Tony. So I've only got 10 to 15 minutes, so I'm going to have to skate over a lot of stuff. But suffice to say that I was sacked in October 2021, as Tony says, and then the tribunal found that I'd been wrongly dismissed and found that, contrary to what the university said, which was that I had not met the standards expected of staff, by which they meant I had said things about anti-Zionist student groups which had been uncomfortable for the Zionist students about whom I had spoken, and this was not the appropriate thing to do, and that was the reason that they'd sacked me. It wasn't my anti-Zionism, it was because I'd made Jewish students uncomfortable. But the judgment in the case, as Tony's been reading this, he'll be able to confirm this, but you can confirm it yourself by reading it online. The judgment determined that that wasn't the reason they'd sacked me. They hadn't sacked me because I'd said things about students. They'd sacked me because the things I had said had been anti-Zionist. So the reason I was sacked was because I had anti-Zionist views and I expressed them. Maybe I'll tell you a little story about the tribunal just for fun, because it's kind of emblematic of the ridiculous way in which the University of Bristol approached the case. At the last minute, the university legal team decided that they were going to change their plea in court, and they were going to say that no longer did they think that they accepted the QC's report, the two QC's reports, and indeed the report of the dean. So they had three reports which had cleared me of anti-Semitism. They no longer wanted to accept that that was the case, and that instead they wanted to plead the case that my views were not worthy of respect in a democratic society, which is the terminology from the Equality Act. And the only person of the university's four witnesses who could attest that case, because two had left and one was not in a similar role, was the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Professor Judith Squires, who is a world-renowned expert on feminist theory and has written widely about the French philosopher Michel Foucault, of whom I'm not a fan, as perhaps some of you know. And so she is a political theorist, so she understands a thing or two about equality legislation. She turns up in the court, and she's asked by my barrister, Palestinian barrister, Zach Samur. The first question she's asked is, do you think Professor Miller's views are not worthy of respect in a democratic society? And she says, yes. And he says, well, so you must think that they're akin to Nazism. And she doesn't know what to say. And he says, well, of course, you know that the legal test for not worthy of respect in a democratic society is that the views must be akin to Nazism. And she goes, oh, yes, they're akin to Nazism. And so the trap was sprung. And he said to her, so can you just humor me for a minute? Let's take a hypothetical example. Imagine that all the Anglo-Saxons in Britain determined that all the non-Anglo-Saxons, there's a few of you in this room, should have to leave and go and live in Cornwall or Wales or some place like that. And the judge, the only non-white judge in the southwest region, not insignificant, intervenes and says, Mr. Samur, all of the non-Anglo-Saxons, Zach says, well, okay, 75% have to leave. The other 25% can remain, but they're denied equal rights in housing, in jobs, in voting, in perpetuity, and none of the 75% who've had to leave can ever come back again, and any Anglo-Saxon anywhere in the world can come and live in Britain. Would that be racist? Oh yes, she says. Oh yes. And would it be wrong for a professor to say that Anglo-Saxonism is racism and it should be ended? Oh no, it wouldn't be wrong, and you couldn't sack them for that. So she had absolutely destroyed the university's case. Absolutely destroyed it. And then, of course, he took her through the same example in relation to Palestine, and of course she had the same answers. So she's effectively saying, my views were Nazi, and at the same time, that Zionism is racism. And of course, those were my views. So it was very, very difficult for them. So I wanted to illustrate that that's the kind of the appalling position they got themselves into. And now, of course, the most recent state of the case is that the university have appealed, and we will determine at some point in the future, the judge will determine whether that appeal goes forward or not, and we'll see what happens. But I mean, I anticipate this case will run and run, because the Zionists cannot let this judgment stay on the record, and equally, we can't let them stop it. So, to go on. Look, there's been lots of cases, and we'll hear about more cases shortly. My case is only one. There have been many other cases at the University of Bristol and many other universities. I think there was, in the University of Warwick, I think there were something like 27 cases of accusations of anti-Semitism ongoing at the same time, which of course never reached the media. There have been some cases which have reached the media, the case of Shahad Abu Salama, for example, and many others. People have mentioned, of course, the case of Shema Delali, who was sacked by the National Union of Students, and who just the other day won her case by making a settlement with the National Union of Students, and thus not having a judgment made in that case. And there have been many other cases up and down the country. And of course, the intensity of these cases has increased since the 7th of October. But I want to make a plea to think about this not just in terms of academic freedom and not just in terms of censorship and freedom of speech, because it's much more than that, it seems to me. And if we confine ourselves just to the hallowed turf of the university, then I think we miss that. Let me say this in a couple of ways. One, first of all, also since the 7th of October, there have been an absolute avalanche of cases taken against professionals, against doctors and accountants and lawyers, physiotherapists, psychotherapists, and many, many others, to their professional bodies. And these cases, of course, have been referred by the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism and the UK Lawyers for Israel, both of which, of course, have a direct connection to the regime in occupied Palestine. And the purpose of these cases, of course, is to drive these professionals out of public life, out of professional life. Who are these professionals? Is there a protected characteristic which unites all or almost all of these professionals, do you think? Yes, there is. What is it? No, they're all Muslims, mate. They're all Muslims. There's an absolute war on the status of Muslims in public life. And it's illustrated through these cases. It's also illustrated through the recent suspension. Did you see this? By Michael Gove, or by the Deputy Prime Minister, I think it was him, who suspended the Civil Service Muslim Network on the basis that it was suspected that some of the Muslims in the civil service might have been thinking that it was a good idea to try and stop the genocide, which is a bad thing. So there is an absolute war on the status of Muslims in our society. Muslims, of course, are the ethnic group or religion who are the most heavily discriminated against in the civil service. They are underrepresented in every single government department by a long way. Hindus to some extent, Sikhs to some extent are discriminated against or have a status lower than their proportion in the population, but Muslims are by far the worst sufferers of that discrimination. And of course, the banning of the Civil Service Muslim Network will only enhance that. So that's one thing I wanted to say, that it's not just academia, it's through the whole of the society, and in particular, the role of Muslims in professional life. So the second thing I wanted to say is, look, this is not about the UK, this is happening everywhere. It's happening in the US. I mean, we see the encampments up and down this country, and we see encampments in the US, of course, and the attacks that they faced in the US, in particular, the UCLA case, but many others, from Zionist thugs and, of course, from the police. This is something which is happening everywhere, but it's not only a question, it seems to me, again, of freedom of speech or censorship. I mean, what the students faced in UCLA was direct violence by Zionist thugs, with the police turning the other way for 3 or 4 hours. And of course, you will have seen, I imagine, some of the stories about the links of these people and who they are, etc., etc. And that seems to me is a clue to the material nature of the struggle which we're facing, of which the question of censorship and freedom of speech is a part, but which is I would say, subsidiary part. While we're in the territory of censorship and freedom of speech, we have at least the opportunity to make the arguments which we will make, which is you can't have academia without freedom of speech and freedom of thought, without academic freedom. You can't have science, in fact, without that either. But nevertheless, there is also a material aspect to this. And Tony mentioned the detonation of universities in Gaza. And that's what has happened to the universities of Gaza, hasn't it? Every single one has been detonated and destroyed, and the Israelis hunted down and selectively assassinated many of the key staff associated with those universities, including the top staff. And just for good measure, they killed all their families as well. And that is what the Zionists think of academic freedom. That's what the Zionists in Palestine think, and that's what the Zionists here think of academic freedom. And they will do the same to us if they can get away with it. And so I think the context for all of this is to say, look, they're waging a material struggle against the possibility of academia, and let's not even talk about of journalism, of school teachers, of civil servants, etc., etc. And we have to, I think, also wage a material struggle against that. Not just a struggle which is rhetorical, but which also involves, as we are seeing on encampments up and down the country, physical action to pursue the demands which we decide we want to pursue, of course, amongst which is the ceasefire. But I would argue we need to go much further than just the question of the ceasefire, or indeed the question of the establishment of a Palestinian state. We need to talk about the ending of Zionism as an ideology altogether. And I see people are increasingly coming round to this idea. I mean, I don't want it to appear that I knew it all before October the 7th, because it's not true. I mean, I came into studying Zionism by accident. I didn't understand what I was doing, and the only reason really that I got involved in the way that I did was because I started to do work after the Iraq War on neoconservatism. And when we did that, we published a report, and I was immediately denounced. In particular, the first person I think who denounced me was Jonathan Hoffman. and his co-conspirator, what's he called? The camping guy. Millet, yeah. Anyway. Anyhow, so they called me anti-Semitic, and I was called anti-Semitic by other people, and I didn't understand what they were talking about. I was like, what? And so that made me want to understand what they were saying. And I actually talked to Jonathan the first time I saw him in the House of Commons, and didn't get very far. But so I started to examine Zionism and to research it from a position really of quite a lot of ignorance. You know, I understood a little bit about settler colonialism. I'd done a PhD in Northern Ireland, and I had a general sense of solidarity with the Palestinians, but I didn't understand really what Zionism was, and it took me a long time to gain some knowledge of it. And even after I started at the University of Bristol, compared to now, I would say I was extremely ignorant of Zionism, extremely ignorant. And it's only through all the research I've done since then that I've become I would say, a bit more knowledgeable, but my eyes have been opened to a whole series of questions which I didn't even know to ask beforehand. And I want to, this is the point in which, I say thank you to the Zionist movement for helping me with that, because if I hadn't been sacked, I wouldn't have had the time to devote almost all of my time to investigating and undermining Zionism. So just to finish, I wanted to say, look, we have to have a material struggle against Zionism. We have to end Zionism, but ending Zionism is a complicated question, and I'll finish on this. It means destroying an ideology. Okay? It doesn't mean destroying individual Zionists, though of course, as we already see, people are dying in their droves on the Palestinian side. Indeed, lots of Israeli soldiers are being killed, although we're not hearing quite so much about the actuality of that. What it means is destroying the circumstances in which the ideology is able to survive and reproduce itself. And that means, of course, de-Zionization. It means, first of all, organizations resigning from the Zionist movement and declaring that they're no longer Zionist, if it's possible for them to do that. And in particular, that will mean communal organizations of one sort or another which have some other kind of representative function, the Board of Deputies, the JLC, the various other Zionist organizations that have other representative functions, like schools and synagogues, which are signed up to the Zionist movement, but which don't need to be. They can be effectively de-Zionized by resigning from the movement. Other organizations will have to cease. But the last thing which needs to happen, it seems to me, is a process which is the thing which was introduced and agreed by the Allies in Yalta in 1945, which is a process, they called it then denazification, and we call it de-Zionization now. Now, I think that's something which has to be looked at seriously. But the last thing I would say, to illustrate how this can happen in a way which is sort of behind people's backs, is that if you look at what happened in Ireland, which became a republic in 1948, where there were many Protestants who thought of themselves as British and who didn't move to the north. But they were die-hard British people. They didn't want to become Irish. They weren't Irish, but they were left behind in the Free State, which became the Republic in 1948. But because the basis of Ulster loyalism, of Irish loyalism in the Republic had been removed, that is, the British guarantee of power, within a generation, almost all of those people thought of themselves as Irish. And that is the way that Zionism will be ended in the end. It's a long process, but we can get there.
My story's nothing compared to that. Are you joking me here? And if you think his accent's bad, then I will speak slow. I'm used to teaching Americans, and I have to say things like power, so as opposed to power and towel and everything like that. So forgive me. Anyway, listen, very, very seriously, thank you for the invitation to be here. This is a learning exercise for me as well. The opportunity to listen to David and Tony. I actually just bought Tony's book recently. I said I was meant to bring it over, and yeah, everybody can clap that. I was going to get him to sign it, but I forgot. Anyway, but genuinely, thanks for the opportunity to be here. It's obviously a very serious issue, and I just want to share with you the experience that I had. And it feels so mundane when you put it up against what David's talking about and what he went through. But actually, I think there's something very significant in the mundanity of it. It just shows you how all-pervasive this is and what's happening at this moment in time. So before I do that, I'll just give you a bit of a background. I first went to Palestine in 2009. I went over to see a friend of mine. He was living in Mahaim Jalazon, which is a refugee camp outside Ramallah. And then anybody who's been to Palestine will know that's it. You can't unlook it, that's it, you're in. So I had that moment in 2009, and then I did my PhD on Palestinian factions and Irish Republican factions and political ritual, and then I took up this post at the Al-Quds University because I felt, I needed to be more present in the space. And it was an incredible moment and a very, very transformative moment for me, both intellectually and also as a pedagogue. It taught me how to teach, and it taught me what education was all about. During that time at Al-Quds University, when I was a professor there, we lost 3 students in the law program and in the engineering school who were murdered in 2015. So it was huge. It was a massive moment. And as Tony mentioned there, I just finished a book called Transitional Injustice, which, you know, the Middle Eastern Monitor guys, you know, nominated for that award, which was great. I'm also running a big project at the moment with the Palestinian Bedouin community, who live on the outskirts of Jerusalem, and from the 7th of October, who have experienced a hell of a lot of shit as well, really, to be honest. A couple of the groups that we've been working with have been forcibly displaced from the land and have ended up off that space. So it's really important that we see this as the whole context. Obviously, all eyes on Gaza, all eyes on Rafah, all eyes on what's happening there, but obviously we know it's all part of a wider project. And of course, it's really important that we center Rafah and Gaza and Palestine in this conversation as well, because all 12 of the Gaza universities are gone. All of the university students in the West Bank have had their education disrupted. No student is going to campus from the 7th of October. I mean, that is absolutely despicable, and it's important that we always hold on to that fact. The other thing I would say is, again, not to downplay, but there are academics that we know. David's experience is truly shocking, but also academics like Stephen Salaita who've gone through hell and back when it comes to being cancelled for a tweet. Jairo Flores, who was cancelled from the University of Texas. Nadira Kevorkian, who was arrested recently by the Israelis and cancelled from the Hebrew University and lost her job. So people have experienced a hell of a lot worse than me not getting to go to Vienna for a couple of days. Well, let me get on to that. This is what happened. I'm going to tell you, and then sure we can talk about it in a wee bit more detail after. November, I get an email. I'm still, you know, I'm 10 years as an academic. You know, when you get an email, somebody inviting you to a conference and they're going to pay for it, Jesus, this is a big deal. Absolutely, you'll take it, 100%. This is great. And it was a closed symposium. It wasn't an open conference. There was invited speakers. It was on the basis of this book. This book was clearly making a bit of noise. I was getting the invitation to go. This was a big deal. So they said, look, based on this book, would you come over, take part in this symposium? We're inviting a number of big names as well. Fuck yeah, well, 100%. So I said, that's great. Oh, sorry, sorry. Irish, I get away with it. So I said, yeah, and that's fine. Start doing all the preparation, you know, yourself, planning in advance, putting the abstracts in, getting the paper ready, etc., etc. And I thought nothing more of it. That was fine. In December, got a text from the postdoc who was organising the event, and she says, look, we might need to change your abstract a wee bit here. We might need to look at some of the words you're using in the abstract and in the title of your paper. And I said, well, what words am I using? Like, you know, I said Palestine. What's wrong with that? And she said, look, we might just change it about a wee bit. And then, so I knew something. You know, storm clouds were coming. Something bad was going to happen here. And that was funny. Not funny, that was bad. And then we move into, obviously, post-October 7th. We're in December, January, February, March, whatever. I get this email. I'm driving to collect Emma from work, sitting outside the hospital. I get an email. It came through. And it was like one of those really cold, dear Dr. Browne, blah, blah, blah. You've been recently invited to this symposium on the 18th of May or whatever it is. Due to social media posts that have recently been brought to our attention, and given the rise of anti-Semitic hate crime across Austria, we can no longer give you a platform, given the fact that the safety of our participants is paramount. Right, okay, so that's fine. Sitting in the car, didn't say anything to him, just went home, just laughed it off a wee bit. I was like, oh, this is mad. But the more I thought about it, the more pissed off I got, and I was going, actually, this is not okay. How am I to blame for the rise of anti-Semitism in Austria? How am I to blame for the purported dangerous environment that there might be at a conference? This is absolutely scurrilous. But I wish I had, you know, I'll be honest with you, I actually was very nervous as well. Yeah. The first reaction was, oh shit. I went back to Twitter, looked through everything and said, what have I said? You know what I mean? You begin to doubt yourself. Have I said something mad here? What's going on? So I looked over and I did a wee calm myself down moment, and I thought, no, actually, we need to attack this head on here. We need to reply to this, and we need to make some noise on this, because if you don't make noise, nothing's going to happen, and it would be an absolute, complete abdication of responsibility, really. In light of everything that was going on, and you're going to self-censor in this moment, it just can't happen. So that was fine. I sent an email to the person, the project supervisor. I said, thank you for, didn't say thank you. I said, dear X, still don't name her, dear X, received your email, deeply disappointed, have passed it on to my legal team, see you in the Beano. That was fine. And then I emailed all the other participants, because they emailed me privately. And I thought, well, you completely stripped all of that away from me. We'll just put it straight away publicly. So I emailed all the other participants, and I CC'd them in the email that she sent me. So they knew straight away what the crack was. And then I thought, well, if it's Twitter that was the problem, guess what's going to happen? 12-tweet thread went straight up on Twitter, and I put all the screenshots up of her email, just to really make sure it, got it spinning. And it went mad on Twitter. It went absolutely crazy. Got lovely traction, lots of feedback, lots of anxiety here, as you can imagine. And that was fine. Then all of a sudden, the other participants, some of them started going, well, what's going on here? This is mad. A couple of them contacted me privately. One of them said, obviously, I'm pulling out. This is ridiculous. Only one out of the 18 said, I'm pulling out. And I said, thank you, I appreciate that. That's unbelievable solidarity. That's what we need in the moment. We need to stand by each other, and that's really good. A couple of the others started sending emails back to the person who'd cancelled me, saying, we need more information here. What are you talking about? I need to have this. You need to send us the offending tweets, and then we can take a collective decision on this and whatever. The organizer then started sending back emails to everybody else, but keeping me out of the email trail. I'm done, gone, finished. But then I had a wee mole in there who was just sending them to me as well. So he just kept passing them over so I could see what was happening. But it spiraled, as you can imagine. And she said, look, it was a very complex decision. It was very challenging to reach this conclusion. We're very happy to discuss it, but we're going to discuss it on Zoom. We're not putting anything in an email that you will then send, and we can, whatever. So that was fine. This is all in the space of 10 days. Then, after 2.5 weeks, the entire event was cancelled. Right? 2.5 weeks later, the symposium that they'd been organising from November, right the way through, this is now the end of March, was cancelled, finished, done. And they'd got some big wigs to come to this thing. So people would have shifted. I'm laughing in the kitchen. People would have shifted things around to be there, So rather than actually say what their issue was, rather than actually put it in an email, rather than actually have the gumption to say what the problem was, they cancelled the entire event. And here's the kicker. You ready for this one? They said, we're not going to do the event, but we'll do an online, one-day event on freedom of speech. So, yeah, and that's where we're at, by the way, still, at this moment in time. They're going ahead with this freedom of speech one-day event. Obviously, I'm not going. I haven't replied yet. But it's a very serious thing because, on top of that, there was a publication coming out, and it depends what stage of your career you're at. It really does. If you're, if you're getting opportunities to publish together and you're in this symposium, blah, blah, blah. But they're going ahead with their publication, and they've said Dr. Browne's paper is not to be included in that publication. So you're not allowed to speak, and then you're not allowed to be in that publication. That's fine, no problem. So the impact of all this, let's be real, the impact of all this is certainly stigma. You feel stigmatized by it, you feel ostracized, you feel people are keeping an eye on you, as David's work has shown, as everybody else has proven in this. The spaces for academic engagement on these important issues get squeezed, they get marginalized. You get viewed as a pariah. You get viewed as a nutter for having the audacity to talk about the weaponization of a peace process in Palestine. For having the audacity to use language like from the river to the sea. I suspect that's what they were pissed off with. Your reputation takes a bit of a kicking as well. Your own university begins to look at you and saying, right, he's a bit of a troublemaker. As it happens, Trinity is also a member of this European-wide group of universities that includes the University of Vienna, so they would have known all about it. And you also get loads of invites. all of a sudden, this cancellation ends up giving an invite to the Lund University, an invite to speak in Oxford, and then an invite to speak at Czech's Notes, Vienna, on something else. Didn't go. So that's where it is, and you know, there are some other very serious issues here as well. Institutional support, I don't know about, obviously you've had your situation, David, but the institution doesn't exactly stand up and support you when you go through something like this. They don't pick up the phone and say to the University of Vienna, what's this all about? You know, one of our academics is coming over to deliver a paper. The guy's got an award for the book, he's published 4 books, he's done whatever, and now you're saying he can't come and talk in your institution? That's a problem. So our institutions have, I think, very much got a duty of care and should be doing a lot more to protect their academic staff when it comes to things like this. And that's something I really think we need to be advancing more fulsomely through the trade union movement. And it's something we're talking about in our own organisation, Academics for Palestine in Ireland. I also feel very lucky that I'm in Ireland, right? Because I do think the environment's a little bit different. You know, point 2 in my contract does say very clearly the right to freedom of expression without fear of prejudice. And that's something I'm happily going to take a pay cut on, you know, as long as we can keep that in there and keep it protected. So I am grateful for the space that I'm in that. So that's what it was. It was a bit mad. It was a bit of a mad story. We have other things that have spiraled out of that. There's been attacks on Twitter. There's been all different sorts of things to come out of it. But it's a very serious moment. It's a very serious time, as David has platformed and as Tony has put up there. So I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to pass it over.
Thank you, Brendan. That was excellent, and thank you, David. Shall we open it now to questions and comments? Let's try and keep them as short and brief as possible so we can work as many in as we can.
Well, thank you very much for your personal accounts. I'm a retired academic. I have been retired for some time, fortunately, I think, because I've campaigned on Palestine for many years and written about it, spoken about it, and obviously started to get a lot of backlash around about 2015-16, and have been thoroughly trashed and defamed, and articles in Jewish Chronicle, Jewish News, all that sort of stuff, and even, you know, Guido Fawkes things. Very unpleasant, but I say I don't risk my job, so, and I'm not that thin-skinned, but it's extremely unpleasant. So I was just wondering how you fight back. I mean, I know I'm one of probably thousands of people, academics and non-academics, and it really enrages you, and you think, well, should I try and go down the legal path? Well, I don't want to lose my home, you know, and it's extremely expensive to try and do that. So how do we fight back? And I've been thinking maybe if there's some place at any rate that we can air, you know, just tell our stories so they can all be put together and people can see how huge this problem is. Just some space where we can publish, because I know exactly who's kind of had it in for me. It's somebody high up in the Jewish labour movement, you know, and other people also have been targeted, I know, by the same person and so on. We can lay it out. But yeah, I suppose my question is, how do you actually fight back, is my question.
Good evening, Farouk Hussein here, the first Muslim solicitor struck off for being an anti-Semite. So I'm in pleasant company with you all here. What I would ask you is, contrary to what the first questioner was saying, I do think the Nancy analogy is justified. And what I'd like to ask is, do you think that the Nancy technique of excluding dissidents from academic life and the professions is the model that the Zionist movement is rolling out across the West and the US? Thank you.
Thank you. So I saw a post on Facebook the other day by Stephen Salaita where he lists the things that he was wrong about. It's quite a long list. But the first one he lists is being reluctant to use the Nazi analogy. That's not his exact words, but that's what he was saying. Now, of course, the Nazi analogy is something which is specifically excoriated in one of the examples appended to the IHRA's working definition of anti-Semitism. If you compare Israel to the Nazis, that is almost by definition, that is regarded as being anti-Semitic. And I think there are many people who, like Stephen, have come to the conclusion that they were wrong about that, about the Nazi analogy. Now, I don't spend a lot of time, I don't know if I've ever used the word Nazi in relation to Zionists, but I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. But I do think that we have seen such horror that the question is, or has become, or should have always been maybe, an empirical question. And so that's the basis on which it should be argued. But I'm also conscious, I mean, I suppose I come from a left-wing tradition, an anti-racist tradition, which has historically always said, including from the revolutionary socialist tradition of the IS and the Socialist Workers' Party and Counterfire. I've never been a member of any of those organizations, but I've worked very closely with people in those kinds of organizations. And they've always had the position that we shouldn't do that because it's needlessly inflammatory and needlessly offensive to Jewish people. And I guess I'd always agreed with that. I'm not sure I agree with it anymore. And I think the events in Gaza have prompted me to rethink that. It's not as if Jewish people are the only people who have ever suffered a genocide. And we know, everyone knows that the Germans committed other genocides. Everybody knows that the Belgians committed a genocide in the Congo, but we don't regularly talk about such matters and say, well, we shouldn't really compare the Democratic Republic of the Congo or Congo-Brazzaville because it's just not on the radar because the Holocaust, the murder of 6 million, looms so large in our culture, and I think that in a way we might start to rethink some of that. That's a very diplomatic answer for me, isn't it? And the second question, should there be a place where we can learn about others' experiences? Of course there should. But I think that my answer to you would be a different one, which is to say that we need to work out how we combat this. And it seems to me there are two models available to us. The first is that model embodied by that jumper-wearing, jam-making socialist from North London, Jeremy Corbyn. And that model, I don't know if this comes from Jeremy's niceness, famed niceness, or his weakness, or his capitulations, or whatever it is that people will say about him, or whether it comes from his advisors, from the Landsmans and the Schneiders, and more recently the Schlossbergs. And we shouldn't forget Seamus Milne. But nevertheless, the strategy adopted was that you apologize. Sorry if there was any hurt, didn't mean to offend, and you move on and the news cycle will be gone and everyone will have forgotten about it next week. But guess what? They didn't forget. It wasn't a matter of ephemeral news cycles. It was a matter of a conscious, combative, coordinated campaign by the Zionist movement to destroy Jeremy Corbyn, and that's what they did. And so if you're in the Green Party, or in Tusk, or in the Workers' Party, or an independent candidate in the coming election, if you think you can apologise, and if you duck for a second, they'll not notice you anymore. The JC will forget it. David Rose won't come and investigate you. That's a fantasy. That's never going to happen. what you need to do, and this is the alternative model, is you need to fight. You need to stand up and fight them. Fight them back. Don't apologize. Don't take any rubbish. Go back to them on the front foot, not defensively, on the front foot. And to do that, of course, I appreciate it's difficult if you're an individual and you've got a job at risk. I mean, obviously I had a job at risk. But you need to have comrades and you need to get advice. You need to have legal advice. Tony's talking about something he's doing in relation to the European Legal Centre. Well, that's a great place to go, and they support lots of pro-Palestinians. There's an organisation I'm involved with called the Left Legal Fighting Fund, which has been supporting a whole range of pro-Palestinian activists over the last 4 or 5 years, including in my case. So there are lots of places that you can go for people to help you, but don't be pressured into apologising or saying something you don't believe in. Let me give you 2 other examples. Sorry, I'll finish. So the cases I mentioned before, I mentioned the case of Shaima Delali, who settled with the National Union of Students. And I would also mention the case of Nazim Ali, the pharmacist who made comments about Grenfell fire and Zionists. Comments which actually empirically are entirely defendable and which should have been defended in the various cases that he had to go through. He went through, I think, 5 or 6 different disciplinary cases with different disciplinary bodies. And he, in the end, he won his case, and he got to keep his license, but in the end, he had to accept that he had been objectively anti-Semitic, even though he hadn't intended to be. Right? And now that was a bad piece of legal advice, in my humble opinion, as was the piece of legal advice which Shaima obviously got from her lawyers, which was to accept that her comments about K-Bar, an event which took place some 14 centuries before the term anti-Semitism was invented, that she had to accept that it was objectively anti-Semitic to mention K-Bar. I mean, this is ridiculous. And so what we find is that, yes, people need to get advice, but you need to be clear that the advice you're getting is good advice. And you know, I would recommend that if you can, you make sure you have an anti-Zionist lawyer, because a lawyer who's not an anti-Zionist will not get the need to fight and how to fight, the strategies that need to be adopted to fight. When I talked to you earlier about, sorry, I'm going on too long, the example of my lawyer, I mean, if I had him as my barrister and my lawyer supporting me, I wouldn't have got such a good result. Absolutely not.
Very briefly. I can't really add too much to that, but I would echo a lot of what David's saying in terms of getting organised and pushing back. And certainly, I've seen, in the post-October 7th moment, you've seen all these organisations and groups popping up to support each other. In Ireland, we have an organisation called Academics for Palestine that has just expanded and exploded across the island. And we really do come together to support each other on this. But we do need to do more, and that's why I was saying about the trade unions. I do think we need to be going to our trade unions and saying that our employer has a duty of care to us as employees. And certainly I think that's maybe easier for us to do in Ireland, perhaps, but that's avenues we're looking at. And that ELSC centre, I think, is fantastic. I've submitted a couple of things recently. I got a caseworker to come meet me in Dublin, go through everything, and who's taking the case, a separate thing, by the way, which I don't want to talk about. On my behalf, so there is support there. You're not alone in that. You don't need to go and foot the bill, and give up your home to do all that. But I do think it's important that we push back a little bit, and we also need to push back against the language. I think that's critical all the time. This ridiculous spin that has been allowed to be put on certain terminologies at this moment in time. Was it the University of Reading have just cancelled the use of the word from the river, or for the phrase from the river to the sea? That's now banned at the University of Reading, apparently, a couple of days ago. So I think we need to really own our language, educate ourselves, and don't be too afraid to use it.
Just in case people don't know, the ELSC, the European Legal Support Centre, which has actually only been in existence, I think, for 3 or 4 years, but is now dealing with dozens and dozens of cases, not only, but mostly Palestinians who are facing dismissal or demotion or problems in their work, and they're doing excellent work indeed. And fortunately, they're also able to attract funding from foundations and others, supporting them to help them with their work. So if you're looking for there are lots of organizations, pro-Palestinian ones obviously, which need support. This one is for those who are interested in legal, in the whole legal situation, the ELSC, European Legal Support Center. More questions? So one over here, and then.
Thank you. I see. Thank you. I wanted to just mention that there's an organization called the Office for Students. Have you heard of that? It says, my college has written to me after banning me from attending the college because of some anti-Semitic remark I apparently made at some dinner several years ago. The master says, the College for Students has issued guidance on the issues around free speech and Gaza, and there's going to be new legislation coming into effect on the 1st of August. So on the issue of what should we do, one thing we ought to do is to write to our MP and ask him to vote against this new legislation that's coming forward. If we all did that, it might have a minor effect, but it would be better than nothing. And incidentally, may I just say that the pessimism that your experience is very sad. I'm very sorry for you. But it's actually also an opportunity. I think one's got to look at both your experience and the dreadful experience of the people in Gaza as an opportunity to combat the Zionists. They are in the dock, and we should make the most of that. We should again write to our MPs. I've written to our Foreign Secretary saying they're in the dock. We shouldn't be supporting them. Pardon? Well, Mr. Cameron hasn't gone, and he did actually change his, he did change his tune a bit. I wrote to him in February, and before that he was saying, oh, we're not backing the ceasefire, and a few weeks later he said, oh, we should back the ceasefire. So it does have an effect.
Forgive me for injecting a note of pessimism in the discussion. I'm a retired Anglican clergyman, so I suppose they cannot use God against me. But I would like to invoke a great English philosopher called Thomas Hobbes, who said, treaties without the sword are but words. So what I'm trying to say is the Zionists, in reality, listen only to force. If you look at the butchery happening in Gaza, nobody can stop it. I mean, we can see on our television screens and so on, but nobody's doing anything. Now Netanyahu is also invading Rafah. So there is a sense of helplessness. I say, people are saying, what can we do? I mean, but all this will have no effect whatsoever on Netanyahu and the state of Israel. So are we actually kidding ourselves? Are we just playing with words, the resolutions? Only force will stop the butchering of Gaza.
Thank you. I had a question specific back to the issue of academic censorship, which is the IHRA definition. I think the government set out a rule that if universities didn't sign up to it, they would lose funding or something. There was some kind of stick brought to bear, and that made me curious, and I dug around to see what my institution had done, and they had adopted it in full, and the impression I get is they did it kind of secretly and they buried it, and there's no sign that they're using that as a stick to influence either staff or students. And in fact, there's research going on in collaboration with Palestine in the place. So, but obviously it's sitting there in the cupboard and could be brought out to do damage at some point in the future. But I wondered whether that is a terrain of battle now, about whether the adoption of it or not, or the cherry picking of some of the examples, or throwing out all the examples and just sticking with the anodyne definition that nobody's going to disagree with if you strip off the Zionist examples. And that whether that is a kind of successful strategy, and especially now, given that, you know, what's happened in Israel since October, whether that's a successful strategy to reopen that debate either for institutions that have adopted it, or whether it's still, or ones that are still considering it. Because I'm sure Starmer, if he does become Prime Minister, will be very happy to maintain that kind of rule. So it requires a grassroots struggle to oppose it.
Would you be ready to say which institution it is that you're...
I wondered whether to. It's the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine.
Right, okay, that's very interesting.
So, don't be pessimistic. We are winning. All over the world, we are winning. We are winning the battle of global public opinion. We are winning the battle of government action very, very slowly. And in West Asia, the resistance is winning against the IDF. I don't know if people realize that. The IDF has not managed to get rid of Hamas in northern Gaza. Every day, especially from Jabalia, we've seen in the last couple of weeks, significant attacks by Qassam, by Quds, and by other of the armed brigades. Remember, there are 7 different armed organizations in Gaza, which, of course, the news refers to as being Hamas. I don't know if people watch these videos on Telegram, which Qassam and Al-Quds and Alex and Martyrs and the PFLP issue, but there have been very many killings of Israeli soldiers in the last couple of weeks, just in Jabalia. And of course, the very famous incident which happened a couple of days ago, where something like 16 special naval IDF personnel were either killed or captured and dragged into the tunnels by Qassam brigades. Militarily, Hamas is winning. Militarily, on the northern border, Hezbollah is winning. Hezbollah has a policy of not using its medium-range missiles. As far as I understand it, and someone should correct me if I'm wrong, they haven't yet used a single medium-range missile of the many thousands which they have in their stockpiles. There's a dead zone 5 kilometers deep underneath the border. 50,000 settlers have had to go into refugee camps in central 48 Israel because they've got nowhere to go. Some 50,000 have left since October the 7th. The entity, the Zionist entity, is tottering. It's also tottering because of the actions of the Islamic Iraqi resistance. I guess, I mean, I can't answer this question, but I guess nobody here can name me the 23 separate armed organizations that are part of the Islamic resistance in Iraq. But that's been very active. It sent suicide drones into Eilat yesterday. In Syria, too, the resistance is active. And indeed, of course, we can't have a discussion like this without mentioning Yemen. Ansar Allah has, the government of Yemen, remember, not the Houthis, has cut off the Red Sea. Yesterday, they sank 2 Israeli and 1 US boats and attacked 2 US Navy ships. They are not winning the military campaign. They are desperate to drag the US into a regional war, which is not happening. The US is the US's fabled pier. Did anyone see the photos? Washed away by the rain. Yesterday or the day before. Look, so if it was the case, I mean, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who knows, maybe Netanyahu too, want to go into Lebanon. If they did that without the Americans, they will be kicked out in short order. And that's why the IDF and the Shin Bet and probably the Mossad, I think, are advising against that. And there's a split, of course, within between the military hierarchy and what is it they call the war committee about what they should do. And the IDF are advising that Rafah should be stopped immediately. But of course, that's not happening yet. So we see a real stress inside the Zionist organizations, which is problematic, right? So, sorry, I'm going on too long again. So that was that question. So I could talk more about that, as you can tell. The IHRA. So, but the same principle applies to the IHRA. Look, I'm really fond of saying this. My case drove a coach and horses through the IHRA. You can't possibly have anti-Zionism being protected in law as an anti-racist or not, at least non-racist set of ideas, and at the same time enforce the IHRA, which says actually anti-Zionism is racist. And so that means, in the end, I don't want to predict the future, but it means that the days of the IHRA definition have to be numbered. And in particular, when I was talking about the Nazi analogy thing, I mean, that example has to go. I mean, it can't possibly be sustained. And so what we have to do is we have to find a way to get rid of the IHRA. Now, of course, universities have adopted it in different ways. My university adopted it under lobbying from the Bristol Jewish Society, which of course is part of the UGS, which is a Zionist organization. They were complaining about me, and the university, off its own bat, offered the student who was complaining about me to pause her complaint while they saw if in 6 months' time the university might like to introduce the IHRA, and then they reactivated the complaint and tried me under it, under the new rules post-dated. And of course, I was still found not guilty. So yes, of course, we have to mobilize against the IHRA. Of course, it must be removed. But we can't be moving from that to what is effectively a sort of liberal version of the IHRA, which is known as the Jerusalem Declaration. We need to abolish all of these definitions of anti-Semitism and have a proper anti-racist understanding in the society about how you deal with racism. And of course, that must focus on the main forms of racism in society. And anti-Semitism is not one of the main forms of racism in society.
But to just add a word about the IHRA, I wish I could be as optimistic about it going as you are, David. I think it's true that you're not seeing at the moment a great deal of discussion around IHRA. Of course, you know, when there was the whole fuss about whether the Labour Party was going to adopt it or not, and so on, it was, you know, in the papers every day. And when it was Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary, who came out with the announcement that if universities didn't adopt the IHRA, then they would have their funding cut. And that did have, I think, you know, quite serious impact. But I'm afraid that I think when you look around, not just in this country, because of course IHRA is, you know, it's gone around the world and is very, very, very influential. And I don't think it's going to be so easily excised from the body politic or from society. It's, in a sense, it's almost got into the sort of ether as, oh, this is what anti-Semitism is, even though it's an appalling, even, you know, just on the grounds of whether it is a definition or not, it is an appalling document. It's not even a definition. If you look up in the Oxford English Dictionary of the definition of a definition, it's a concise statement of something. Concise statement. Well, the IHRA working definition is, I think it's 534 words. Now, you know, if you need that, if that's a concise statement of something, then that's not a definition. So I think then there has to be other strategies to try and fight back against IHRA. Certainly, it's not this alternative one, the JDA. You're absolutely right. The Jerusalem Declaration on anti-Semitism, you hardly ever see it referred to now, even though there was a fanfare at the time because it was seen to accommodate the understanding of the Palestinians because they are mentioned in this. The Palestinians, many Palestinians themselves, I think, and Palestinian organizations didn't like it because of the fact it drew their name into it. Why should they be drawn into it at all? I mean, you know, if you want to make a definition of anti-Semitism and you're saying that Palestinians are not anti-Semitic, you don't need to put that in a definition. You have a definition which covers real anti-Semitism. And the problem is that the IHRA doesn't do that. But the IHRA is really, its forces as a kind of discursive document. And these phrases about, you know, you can't say that Jews are Nazis or Israelis are Nazis and so on. These have become a kind of mantra which you see repeated again and again when people want to refer to what is and what isn't anti-Semitism. I first started working in the area of anti-Semitism over 40 years ago. There was no need ever to have a definition of anti-Semitism. There was a consensus after the Second World War about what anti-Semitism was about, and that served very well for some decades. It's only when Israel wanted to find a way of defending criticism of it, to find some weapon in order to defend criticism, it then chose to invest energy and time and leadership in pushing for a new definition, and that is very much the way the IHRA was born. And I'm afraid people, I think, who we really want to find a liberation for the Palestinians, we need some really good thinking about things like how we really push back against something like IHRA. Can we have some? No, I'm afraid not. You had your turn. Somebody at the back.
We need to leave by 8:30, so last round of questions. I think we can take 2 more questions. Questions from people who haven't asked.
What I wanted to ask is that we all know about the IHRA definition. Okay, we all know about the IHRA definition. When universities adopt it, is given the feeling, the anti-Israel and pro-Palestine feeling that there is among lots of students now, is it publicized what the definition actually means? Is it put online at the university? Is it put physically in the students' union or around the university? Are people aware of the examples in it as well as the original definition? So is it publicized at universities?
I can speak to a degree from a position of knowledge because I was the author of a LinkedIn post where I compared what was going on in Gaza with, and directly did so, with what happened in Nazi Germany. A complaint was made against me to my professional body, and I was told I was being anti-Semitic. I suspect, although I can't prove it, it was UK Lawyers for Israel behind it. They made a complaint. They wrote a 2-page complaint against me to my professional body. I'm a barrister, I should say. I said, I'm not going to stand for this. I took a week off. I wrote a 3,000-page response, and there was no case to answer. Be very, very careful. The IHRA definition is illegal. It does not have any foundation whatsoever in law. 2 of the most senior, what were then Queen's Counsel, now King's Counsel, have given opinions on this, saying it is not only in breach of the common law of England and Wales, it is also in breach of European law, it is also in breach, most importantly, of Article 10 of the European Convention. Therefore, spread the word loud and clear. If you are alleged to have made any remark which is purported to be anti-Semitic, and the yardstick as against that is measured is the IHRA definition, pat yourself on the back. You've done a good job. Why? Because that document is not worth the paper it's written on. It is illegal. Please bear that in mind.
I don't have a whole lot to say about the IHRA, but I defer to David and his expertise on this. One thing I would say just about owning the space a bit more. I mean, what I'm finding certainly in my own institution is that some loud voices are steering the direction of, you know, definitions around anti-Semitism at Trinity, for example. And there are a contingent of Jewish scholars in Trinity who just don't subscribe to this at all and want to, want the opportunity to push back against this. And so I think we need to really elevate people who are in those spaces and who want to join those conversations and do that. And that's our role as allies in the struggle as well, is to foster those spaces. So, and the other thing I would say, I think David summed up the the resistance very strongly, but also I never thought we would see the success of the camps that we've seen. That's really put a lot of institutions on notice when it comes to their partnerships, when it comes to their scientific collaborations and weapons deals and everything else. So I think that is a win. I think we should be looking very carefully at that. And then there are other direct action wins that we've seen recently as well, that we should really spotlight, I think. So I would share your positivity on that.
Thank you. So, I mean, yes, look, the fight back has to be multi-pronged and multi-directional. So it seems to me that the cutting edge of Palestine solidarity work in this country at the moment is the absolute extraordinary efforts of Palestine Action to destroy arms factories. And with that in mind, I think that we need to develop a material anti-Zionism, which can not only shut down arms factories, but also target all of these charities. There are perhaps 2,000 Zionist charities in this country, which are on a daily basis supporting the genocide, like indirectly or directly, including, of course, sending money directly to particular settlements, and also, in fact, even directly to the so-called Israel Defense Forces. One of them we reported on, and I think others have too, the Association for the Wellbeing of Israel Soldiers. When we reported on it, and others had reported on it too, I should mention, it's now had its website closed down, it's shut down all its social media, it deleted all its videos, and so it's now gone dark. It's run by a guy called Richard Kemp, who is, of course, a mad Christian Islamophobe Zionist. So that's the other thing, is that we have to push back in that direction. And on that particular question on the IHRA, yes, we have to target it legally on a legal basis, but we also have to think about what is the basis for all these complaints which are going up against lawyers and barristers and accountants and the like. And the basis of it, the material basis of the ability to do that is the existence of the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism and the UK Lawyers for Israel. They have to be targeted, and we have to shut them down. So we need to do proper research and get them in court and have disclosure and shut these organizations down once and for all. And then these complaints will go.
Okay, there are a few minutes left, but I think we've had a very good discussion. It's, I think, drawn out very important ways of pushing back against the attack on freedom of speech on Palestine. I think that we really need, however, to keep very much in our focus the future of Palestinians, because we are in danger in this awful situation at the moment, obviously, of we can sit here comfortably in this room and talk about strategies and talk about genocide and so on. Meanwhile, that is what is going on over there. And you know, we are getting into a situation where it won't just be talking about whether genocide or you know, when it's going to end. You know, it may end, you know, before we're anywhere in a position to do anything about it. So clearly that's not our task here this evening, but I think it should energize us to feel that on the level of free speech, which in order to get any success in this area, we have to have free speech. People have to be allowed to say what they want to say. You don't have to agree with it necessarily, obviously, but the whole idea about free speech is that that's what it is. You know, it's not your right not to be offended. So I hope we can take away some positives from this meeting, and you know, those who are activists in this area take heart from the fact that there are organizations and there are people who are trying to push back on this issue of free speech. So thank you all very much for coming and listening so attentively, and particularly my thanks to Brendan and to David for their excellent presentations of their own situation, with some humor from both of them too. It's amazing that they can have that. So thanks to them, and thanks to you all, and thank you to MEMO and to P21 for organizing this event this evening. Thank you very much.